leg and frozen foot, which had become numb and fallen into the fire one night at Starved Camp, and been badly maimed before she awakened to feel the pain. I wanted to speak to her, but when I saw how lonesome and ill she looked, something like pain choked off my words. Her brother Isaac had died at that awful camp, and she herself would not have lived had Mr. Oakley not been so good to her. He was now comforting her with the assurance that he would have the foot cared for by a doctor as soon as they should reach the settlement, and she, believing him, was trying to be brave and patient. We all resumed travel on horseback and reached Johnson's ranch at about the same hour in the day. As we approached, the little colony of emigrants which had settled in the neighborhood the previous autumn crowded in and about the two-roomed adobe house which Mr. Johnson had kindly set apart as a stopping place for the several relief parties on their way to and from the mountains. All were anxious to see the sufferers for whose rescue they had helped to provide. Survivors of the Forlorn Hope and of the First Relief were also there awaiting the arrival of their expected loved ones. There Simon Murphy, who came with us, met his sisters and brother. Mary Graves took from the arms of Charles Stone her slowly dying baby sister. She received from the hands of John Stark her brother Jonathan and her sister Nancy, and heard of the death of her mother and of her brother Franklin at Starved Camp. That house of welcome became a house of mourning when Messrs. Eddy and Foster repeated the names of those who had perished in the snows. The scenes were so heartrending that I slipped out of doors and sat in the sunshine waiting for Frances and Georgia, and thinking of her who had entrusted us to the care of God. Before our short stay at the Johnson Ranch ended, we little girls had a peculiar experience. While standing in a doorway, the door closed with a bang upon two of my fingers. My piercing cry brought several persons to the spot, and one among them sat down and soothed me in a motherly way. After I was myself again, she examined the dress into which Messrs. Thompson and Eddy had stitched so much goodwill, and she said, "Let me take off this clumsy thing and give you a little blue dress with white flowers on it." She made the change, and after she had fastened it in the back, she got a needle and white thread, and bade me stand closer to her, so that she might sew up the tear which exposed my knees. She asked why I looked so hard at her sewing, and I replied, "My mother always makes little stitches when she sews my dresses." No amount of pulling down of the sleeves or straightening out of the skirt could conceal the fact that I was too large for the garment. As I was leaving her, I heard her say to a companion, "That is just as good for her, and this will make two for my little girl." Later in the day, Frances and Georgia parted with their silks and looked as forlorn as I in calico substitutes. Oh, the balm and beauty of that early morning when Messrs. Eddy, Thompson, and Miller took us on horseback down the Sacramento Valley. Under the leafy trees and over the budding blossoms we rode. Not rapidly, but steadily, we neared our journey's end. Toward night, when the birds had stopped their singing and were hiding themselves among bush and bough, we reached the home of Mr. and Mrs. John Sinclair on the American River, 35 miles from Johnson's ranch and only 2½ from Sutter's Fort. That hospitable house was overcrowded with earlier arrivals, but as it was too late for us to cross the river, sympathetic Mrs. Sinclair said that she would find a place for us. Having no bed to offer, she loosened the rag carpet from one corner of the room, had fresh straw put on the floor, and after supper tucked us away on it, drawing the carpet over us in place of quilts. We had bread and milk for supper that night, and the same good food next day. In the afternoon we were taken across the river in an Indian canoe. Then we followed the winding path through the tules to Sutter's Fort, where we were given over to our half-sisters by those heroic men who had kept their pledge to our mother and saved our lives. End of chapter 15. Recorded by Donna Stewart, Seattle, Washington.